is the Bearcast, presented by Bird Culchion Ford. Bird Culchion Ford has been in Waco since 1936. Ford is the #1 selling truck in Texas 43 years running. The Bearcast is also presented by WellMed Medical Management and USMD Health System Dallas. Here's Craig Smoak and Grayson Grundhoefer.
And welcome in on this Tuesday, February the 13th, 2024. It is the Bearcast on SicEm365.com and the Baylor Athletics on SicEm365 YouTube page, which if you haven't already, please hit the like button and please hit that subscribe button. We would certainly appreciate you if you did that for us, but welcome in regardless. I'm Craig Smoak, joined as always by Grayson Grundhoefer, and we've got Garrett Ross behind the scenes, and we've got a little over an hour plus to talk a lot of things Baylor athletics, from football to basketball, where we currently stand in the Big 12 race, and we'll get to your questions and your mailbag at the end of the show. But Grayson, Super Bowl is come and gone. The NFL season is over. We saw now where the offseason has really football-wise begun all over every level at this point. But how did you feel like the NFL wrapped up? Were you happy with the Chiefs' win on Sunday?
No, I was a little bummed about it.
I think you probably were.
Yeah, a lot of my wife's family, they're 49ers fans. And, you know, seen the Chiefs a lot. I have a really good friend that's a Chiefs fan. So, I mean, I understood, why he was excited. I cheered for them a couple times in these other Super Bowls. But this time I felt like, all right, we're going to cheer for, my wife's family and their team. My team's the Colts, so they weren't in it. So I went ahead and cheered for them. I really like McCaffrey, so I was happy to see him have a really good performance. But, in general, they just couldn't overcome the Mahomes stuff. There was also some really questionable stuff going on there with the overtime rules and everything like that. So, it was a fun game. A little sad about the result, though.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fantastic finish, and Patrick Mahomes is just a dude that we haven't quite seen anybody like him before, and may not ever see anybody like him again. Time will tell on that, but, man, he is special, and the Chiefs dynasty is rolling on along. So that brought the NFL season to a close, and that's notable because the offseason now truly kicks off for each level. You'll have spring football. There'll probably be some Baylor guys involved in the UFL, which is now the Mutant Allied, I guess spring leagues come together. You had the USFL and XFL merge this offseason. So that will be one league now between those two, and there will be some Baylor flavor in there. But for all intents and purposes, it's the off season, and so we've got some off-season things to talk about, and that includes a note right here at the very top as the Combine list came out today for the NFL draft and the activities that will be going on in Indianapolis later on this month. And one Baylor player was invited, so I just wanted to touch on that briefly before we dive full on into signing day last week and then some basketball. But I did see this come down just a little while ago in the last 30 minutes that Gabe Hall was selected to participate in the 2024 NFL Combine out in Indianapolis. He is the lone Baylor rep. And you wondered, would they get anybody? Because it's just not a very, impressive class that was available to be drafted this year. Gabe Hall, one of those guys, obviously. But beyond that, you had a lot of the guys who would be eligible come back. And so you have limited options. And, yeah, there will be one guy in Indianapolis, and that will be Gabe Hall. So he will try to keep a little draft streak alive and try to give them some representation. But he performed well during the All-Star week and heard some good things there. But, that's going to be your lone rep that we kind of circle and follow through this journey to hopefully land in the NFL somewhere.
Right, and I remember during fall camp and spring football, actually it was more just fall, I think, when NFL scouts are out there looking at players, and they all gravitated towards the defensive line, specifically probably to Gabe Hall. And then, Gabe showed out really well at the Reese's Senior Bowl, especially in the lead-up through practices, got a ton of praise from various scouts, media that were at the event. So really happy for him. We got to see flashes at times, but never all came together. There is a chance that he's a better pro, honestly, than he was a college player. So I'm excited for him. I do think he will get drafted, but he's going to have to, continue to perform well and be consistent with interviews and his testing and all the drills. Because, really to be a later round pick, it's all about the other stuff, the intangibles. And so we'll see if he can get to that point. But I'm happy for him. That's a great honor.
Yeah, it really is, and I'm sure something that he's dreamed about, like a lot of guys dream about, just the various things along the process of getting drafted and to participate in all-star games and then to be in the combine. The only thing after that is to go actually get drafted, and they'll have the pro day set up and all those different types of things along the way as well. But, last year you just had Siaki Ika drafted. That was the lone guy, and so this year Gabe Hall will be your best and really only opportunity to see that happen. But wanted to mention that right there at the top. So you've got one Bear who's on his way out and some good news there. But last week you were solo as we had our crew split up in Las Vegas for the Super Bowl coverage. And you touched on the possibilities that were out there for Baylor. And then Wednesday rolled around and they added a couple of new names to their 2024 recruiting class. So let's dive right in there. And they were a couple of guys that we talked about at length over the last few weeks and months to a certain extent. But Alex Foster, the big-time defensive lineman who we know had interest from a lot of different schools, including Texas there, was pretty hot and heavy towards the end of the regular season. It felt like, they could be making their move after sort of just keeping in contact and continuing to recruit him. But he was committed to Baylor throughout. Scheduled the visit, you're like, here we go. But then he kind of died down after that, and I know that you talked to him quite a bit, and you maintained that you thought he was going to sign with Baylor when all was said and done, and, well, he finally did. He is officially in the class. Alex Foster, defensive lineman out of Mississippi, inks with the Bears, and so a big question mark is answered, and it was good news for Dave Aranda and company.
Yeah, there was tons of speculation kind of leading up to that first signing day with Texas, potentially being able to flip him. And then obviously when he didn't sign with Baylor, a lot of people were nervous about that. A lot of crystal balls changed, started putting in predictions for Alex Foster to flip to Texas. And simply that didn't happen. And honestly, throughout the time period that I talked to him, this was just a circumstance where a recruit was very honest with me and kind of where he was at. And, he never really, I know you can say he wavered because he did take visits. I understand all that. And he definitely had interest in Texas. But I think in general, after that visit, he kind of knew that Baylor was the place for him. And I think that was very important to him throughout the last, month and a half of his recruiting process, that he felt that way and saw that. And so, this is a huge one. He was the priority going into this signing period. You didn't really know that these other things were going to happen with, Josh Lair getting out of his NLI with Washington, or Ashton Bethel Roman getting out of his NLI with Arkansas. You didn't know those things were going to unfold the way that they did. But what you did know is that getting Alex Foster to sign that second signing day period was an absolute priority for Dave Rand and the staff, and that's exactly what they did. And he's a very good prospect. He's my top prospect in the class ratings wise. A true 4-star guy. He's got 4-star rankings as far as composite goes. On3 updated their rankings and made him a top 152 prospect in the entire nation. He's been disrespected in a couple different ranking sites, but I do think the mixture of On3 and 247 probably got it right with him being, right around that low 4-star territory, 6'5", 275, with really good production. This was the priority, and Baylor and the staff got it done.
So Alex Foster makes it official and signs with Baylor after some thoughts that, somebody else could come in and poach him, potentially Texas being the main one, the key one that we talked about. But obviously the staff with a nice win to hang on to him, and that was not all last Wednesday as Josh Lair, young man who found himself in the midst of coaching changes and all that comes with that, had signed with Washington originally, and then, of course, they lose head coach Kalen DeBoer to Alabama, and Jed Fish rolls in from Arizona, but everybody on the Washington roster, much like Arizona, now gets a free month to get re-recruited, basically, and that left him to, I guess, check all of his options once again, and here comes Baylor entering the fray to try and flip him, and sure enough, they get the job done. The Missouri City, Texas safety from Fort Bend Marshall High School inks with the Bears and had an impressive offer list. Washington, obviously, they were a college football playoff team. Texas was a college football playoff team, and those were a couple of teams that were involved with him amongst many others. Michigan, Oklahoma, LSU, a bunch of teams that offered him, and he is headed to Waco. So man, just kind of lay out the story for us here for how this all went down and how they found themselves getting a double dip last Wednesday on what was otherwise going to be kind of a quiet day we expected, but between Foster signing and then Lair flipping, I'd say a pretty great day for this Baylor coaching staff that hasn't had a lot of big celebrations, but this certainly seemed like one.
Right, and I mean, this story, kind of started immediately when he got out of his national letter of intent. Like you mentioned, Kalen DeBoer going to Alabama, so he got out of that letter of intent, reopened his recruitment, and Baylor just started recruiting him as hard as they could. I mean, they did everything they could to land him. They got him on campus for a couple days, Friday and Saturday, the weekend before signing day, and I think that visit really just paid huge dividends. I felt really good about where Baylor was at going into that visit. And then, of course, once the visit happened, felt great about where, Baylor was at with him. And I think this is a situation where, Baylor was in his top 3 initially when he chose Washington in September. And so as the story unfolded, he reopens his recruitment. He already had great relationships with the Baylor staff, specifically Matthew Pallage. And when you have those relationships already built in, when you have that familiarity with a staff, and you're kind of just looking for a place that, it's not technically the place you wanted to go initially, but it is a place that still feels like home. I think them getting him back on campus really showed that, really gave him, trust in his next decision. And so for that reason, I think that's why he chose Baylor. Now, you mentioned the offer list. It's incredible. I mean, it's probably the best offer list in the class. It's really, really good. You mentioned a few: Michigan, Miami, LSU, Texas, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Texas A&M. Tons of really good offers. He's a very good prospect. 6'1", 185 pounds. I think he's going to slate in pretty well at the star position for Baylor. He could play boundary safety as well. But I think you're looking for a true difference maker at star that they haven't had since Jalen Petrie, and they're hoping to get that with Kendrick Simpkins this upcoming year. But to have a guy like this to be your prospect of the future there is massive, and I think that's what Josh Lair is. He's a very good prospect. For me, a 4-star prospect. Nationally, he's right on that fringe of being high 3-star, low 4-star. So that's the kind of blue chip type prospect they're getting.
Yeah, so if you were one that goes gaga over offer list, certainly go when you're feeling down about maybe the class, because I know there was a lot of hand-wringing after the first signing day of just sort of where they ranked and all of that, and there still is, even after last Wednesday, but go look at Josh Lair's offer list. That ought to make you feel better, at least for a minute or two, because it is mightily impressive. And so, yeah, for all the schools that had an opportunity to go and attend to pick Baylor, that's a big win for Dave Aranda and staff. And so Josh Lair and Alex Foster, 2 very nice pickups for this program on second signing day. And now the book on 2024 is, for all intents and purposes, closed after a very long road. Now it is on to 2025, 26, 27, and so on. It never stops. So I'll blink and, look up and find myself talking here, and it's 5 years fast forward, and we're talking about 2032 and all that. That's just how it kind of all flies by. So 2024, we can put the period on the end of this story, but it's an exclamation point really for Baylor because of how Wednesday ended. So there you go. And all said and done, 14 guys. Grayson, I mean, just how do you feel about the class? I know it's not going to be, again, very highly ranked. We knew going in this was a smaller class, but any holes, any, oh man, wish they could have done that differently. Any thoughts, I guess, in general on how it all came to be and how it all came to a close?
Yeah, so I mean, I think adding Josh Lair and, of course, holding on to Alex Foster gives you more of the high-end talent in the class. And so, when you look at it that way, I think that's really important to have, a top group that you feel really good about as far as being priority prospects. Then you kind of fill out the rest of the class with guys that you believe in, whether it's culturally or talent upside or various things like that. You're going to have your reasons. Baylor's not going to sign a class that's just full of sure things. That's just not going to happen. You got to take some chances, take some risks, and fill out your class with guys you truly believe in. And, as far as the recruiting class goes, I think there's a couple areas, but wide receiver, they tried to get back in on Ashton Bethel-Roman on National Signing Day. He chose Texas A&M. If they would have added him in this class, that would have been a totally different story. But at wide receiver, all you have right now is Jaden Porter. And if you look at their depth chart, in their class breakdown, they have some holes at the wide receiver position, particularly after this year. I know you can go to the transfer portal and address many of these problems, but when you look at it and you see that as far as redshirt sophomores or younger, they only have 3 of them on the roster. That's just a little weird for development and for trying to get a group of guys to get better and better as, they're younger, trying to become, the kind of prospects you want on your roster. It's just weird to have that few young guys at a position where you need a lot of wide receivers. Like, you need depth in this kind of air raid offense. So I know they have that for the older guys, but I just think for the younger guys, there's a hole there where I probably would have taken another wide receiver, but clearly they didn't have one they loved. That means you're going to take one in the transfer portal, maybe one more in the transfer portal. Definitely means the 2025 class is going to be loaded at the wide receiver position. Outside of that, though, I think this class addressed all the needs they really had. You went out, you found an older linebacker as well as a really good high school linebacker. That was really important to me. They have to address that position. It has not been good enough, at all. Their linebacker play has not been good enough, and we've seen all these guys who are younger, they've gotten opportunities to play, and it just hasn't come full circle. So adding Kylan Reed and then a guy like Keaton Thomas, who you believe could play early, and who I believe will be their starting linebacker next year, was vitally important. Went out, found an older nose tackle as well, and Tonga Lolohea gives you depth at nose tackle, which obviously they needed last year. That was a huge problem. Other than that, you found a couple offensive linemen. You just had a massive offensive line class, so you didn't need a ton of bodies there. So I felt like they addressed that pretty good too. Found a quarterback. We can debate on, what level of quarterback, Nate Bennett is, but you found one that you like. Jake Spavital went in, reaffirmed that as well. And now you're kind of seeing there with a quarterback room that you feel good about, and you have a 2025 commit who's a 4-star prospect. So again, things are trending up there. And in the secondary, they addressed that as well. So majority of the needs they addressed. I do think that I would have liked to have seen a few more higher-end additions, but I think we're probably going to see that more so in the 2025 class just because, a little bit of a late start, changes in NIL, changes in recruiting approach. It takes some time for that to really sink in, but I think we'll see the full effects of that in the 2025 class, and I think we saw it with landing Josh Lair, to be honest.
Yeah, that was a really nice pickup for them, and so 2024 not maybe everything that you wanted, like you said, and laid out there, but got a pretty good chunk of what you needed. And so will be interesting to see what they do now with their remaining portal opportunities and the remaining scholarships that they want to divvy up to use to fill in holes elsewhere. And they won't get all that done before spring ball. They'll possibly, pick up somebody. But I think we'll see a lot of post-spring ball activity with that starting up here in about a month from now. So they'll have a better idea afterwards, but everybody else will too. That's the thing is if they need a receiver, there'll be 50 other teams in the country that are also looking for a receiver. So got to get back in the fight as far as recruiting goes. But 2024 is done for all intents and purposes outside of just the scattering of transfers that could still join for next season. But they've been busy between staff changes, the end of the season, and this road to get here. And I'm sure it's nice to take a little bit of a deep breath, but you can't take too much of a break because it's never ending. So that was last Wednesday. Welcome to Alex Foster and Josh Lair, and look forward to learning more about them as they get their journeys started, but a nice splashy way to end all of that cycle. Meanwhile, so you had Gabe Hall getting invited to the Combine. You had National Signing Day number 2. Also had some talk for next year as far as win totals go. And the Big 12, along with other leagues, seeing their win totals thrown out there by FanDuel on Monday. And here you get a look at how the Big 12 looks according to FanDuel and their college football win totals. Now, granted, they're trying to get you to bet here, so it's not like they're predicting this is exactly how it's going to go. But you see where teams kind of fall in the lines here. And so remember that you've got 4 teams coming over from the Pac-12 to join the conference. Meanwhile, Texas and Oklahoma are on their way out, and that's going to take some getting used to, just all of what I briefly mentioned there. But we've been talking about, just this new league and what it's going to look like, and here's our first glimpse of what Vegas thinks it's going to look like. 9.5 wins for Kansas State and Utah, the top margin for any Big 12 teams. And that makes sense, and I guess just let me know when you want to stop on any level here, but I'm certainly not going to argue with either one of these. I can see where you're coming from here. K-State with an exciting young quarterback and just a very stout program at the moment, and Utah very much the same. Cam Rising coming back, and with Brent Keithy's coming back, I believe, as well, and so that's two guys who you did not have at their full capacity by any means this past season that you'll get back and amongst the rest of your returners, but just a really great coach and program. And so K-State and Utah at 9.5 wins according to Vegas.
Yeah, good culture programs right there with two coaches you really believe in. I am curious how Kansas State does with no Will Howard. I know Avery Johnson was who they were setting everything up for this year. I understand that. But let's not act like Will Howard wasn't a big part of the reason they had success last year. I mean, he was a good quarterback for them, and he gave them depth at the position. If Avery Johnson gets hurt, which he very well might, I mean, if he's going to carry the ball, 15, 20 times a game, I mean, he very well could get hurt for some stretches. So I'm very curious to see how that plays out. 9.5 wins is a lot of wins because you're basically saying you got to win 10, to win that bet. I feel a little bit better about Utah as long as Cam Rising is healthy, but I understand why those two are the favorites, and they'd be my favorites as well at this very moment.
Yeah, so you've got those two there. Then the next level, 8.5 wins, Arizona, which is I'd go under on them right now with Jed Fish leaving. I know you've got McMillan coming back at wide receiver. You've got your very talented quarterback and Noah Fafita coming back as well. But 8.5 wins for Arizona seems like biting off a pretty good chunk for a team that's got a lot of questions right now. But the other three, Kansas, I think that's very safe to have them at 8.5 wins. Texas Tech, last year, definitely a disappointment, but I think that they're taking a different approach now, whereas last offseason it was a lot of talk after winning 8 games and winning the bowl game, and you felt a lot of the hype during the offseason. I think that based on the fact that even though they finished strong, they didn't quite live up to that. They're going to take a more cautious kind of, I guess, less boisterous approach, maybe, if that was the right word. I think you know where I'm coming from here. They're just going to be a little bit more tempered on the expectations outwardly, although inwardly still very much high expectations. Quarterback coming back. You finally got that figured out with Tyler Shuck just out of the way. You don't have to worry anymore about is he healthy, is he not healthy, and they've been recruiting well. So Texas Tech also a part of that in a year where I think 8.5 is what you'd be expecting. They've won, was it 7 this past year, or was it 8?
Well, regular season, because this is only regular season win totals. They won 7.
Okay, so 7.
Yeah.
So
and 7 the year before.
You'd expect them to improve off that here at this point in year number 3 and a bunch of experience under their belt. But you've got Texas Tech there, and then UCF. So Vegas expecting a pretty significant bounce back for Gus Malzahn and company, and they've got KJ Jefferson coming in to play quarterback from Arkansas, another team that no longer you would think has to worry about, is our starting quarterback healthy? Is he not? Because they played that game a lot with John Rice Plumlee. So now you got a much bigger, sturdier QB and KJ Jefferson coming over from Arkansas. But those are the 4 there at 8.5 wins. I'll say right at the top, I think Arizona, if they win 8.5 games, then geez Louise, that'd be incredible, given all the changeover. Kansas, I'd absolutely have in that tier. Texas Tech, I think that's the right spot to make it interesting to bet on them. And then UCF, that seems like a pretty large jump. I don't know about 8.5 wins in the regular season for them. I also, though, do not have all the schedules memorized. So maybe I look at the schedules and I feel a little bit differently, but still that one to me is a pretty large number for them in year number 2. So any thoughts on that particular tier right there?
Yeah, this is the tier to vote on, or to bet on the unders for. Absolutely the tier to bet the unders for. I understand the Kansas one. I mean, that is a bet on Jalen Daniels being healthy, though, all year because there is no Jason Bean to fall back on. But looking at their schedule, they seem like the best bet to actually go 9-3 and cover this bet. Arizona losing your head coach, and we're just going to say they're going to do exactly what they did last year because they went 9-3 a year ago and then won their bowl game to get to 10-3. That's a stretch to me. Texas Tech going up to 9 wins. Again, in order to win this bet, you got to go 9-3. I don't think Tech's going 9-3, so I'd be betting the under on that. And UCF is absolutely not winning 9 games next year. I don't know who made that. I don't know who made that number for them or why they felt so confident in that, but I don't see that at all. And I looked at UCF's schedule. So here you go on UCF. So New Hampshire and Sam Houston, fine. At TCU, Colorado, at Florida, Cincy, at Iowa State, BYU, Arizona, at Arizona State, at West Virginia, Utah. And they're supposed to go 9-3 with that schedule. I mean, again, road games at TCU, at Florida, at Iowa State, at West Virginia. I just don't see it at all with them. This is the group that I'm betting the under on for sure if I'm betting at this point. I think all three of those teams belong in the tier right below them.
Well, that's here right below 7.5 wins, and this is why they make it interesting because the UCF one I just don't see a lot of people betting the over there, but I can definitely see Kansas. I cannot see Arizona right now, and Texas Tech. I can see some people being confident. I mean, it's
only
betting.
Their fans. Yeah,
I mean, but that's the whole point, though. It's
right.
betting. It's supposed to get people to bet. So, if you think they're going to be good, then 9-3 is not crazy because it's not really that great of a record. You're still losing 3 games, but with the 7.5 bar here, you've got Iowa State, which I think that's low. Oklahoma State, which I think, given their track record, you could definitely say, no, I think that they win 8 games next year. And then TCU, you're expecting a bounce back as they did not even make a bowl game a year ago off of a national championship appearance. But they seem to be another team where maybe the expectations aren't as loud outwardly and they are a little bit more just work behind the scenes and get back to the grind and, all that jazz. And so they are hoping for a nice bounce back year there in Fort Worth because last year was an awfully disappointing follow-up to the point where I don't think by any means Sonny Dykes is nowhere on a seat that is anywhere considered warm, okay? Let's make that very clear. But the 2 years he's had in Fort Worth are so drastically different that you wonder, okay, like what's the middle here? Is it the middle where it's going to be and then it kind of flip-flops, or does it lean one direction or the other? I don't know. That's going to be very interesting for them. So 7.5 wins. I think I'd go over for Iowa State. And again, I don't know the schedules. I'm not doing this with the schedules in front of me, but I think Iowa State's going to be really good. So I go over with them. Oklahoma State, I'd have to look at their schedule, but I'd probably default to over with them at this point. And then TCU, that's a nice little sweet number there at 7.5. I'd have to go and kind of dig into their schedule a little bit.
Yeah, I think I would kind of just pass on all three just because I think this is the right tier for them. I think all three of them, just like the 3 teams above them, should all be at the 7.5 number. I do think that Iowa State is probably the one I would bet out of the 3 here, though. I do think that I think 8-4 feels pretty safe for them this upcoming year. That's just kind of where I'm at with it. But again, I think these teams are at a much better level than 3 of the teams above them at 8.5 wins. I just think it's pretty ridiculous that they're a whole win lower than those teams at this moment.
Yep. So you have that there, and on to 6.5. Kind of surprising to see West Virginia was such a low number because they had a really good year last year. Now, granted, every year your team's different, especially in this era of college football. It's really nothing like it was. Your roster can flip over 90% from the year prior, practically. In some cases, like we've seen with a Dion at Colorado, G.J. Kinney at Texas State, etc. But 6.5 for West Virginia seems like a pretty easy jump to make and say over with them. But that's the whole point of this exercise for Las Vegas, is to say, here's this number, and you're supposed to be smarter, and, that's a stupid number for West Virginia. I'm going to go pour on the over, and then they turn around and they win 6 games, and you lose your bet, and that's the whole point here. Right. So 6.5 for West Virginia, but that still just caught my eye because that seems low for a team that is expecting way more than 6.5 wins next year.
Yeah, and initially it felt low to me too, especially because they have 5 home games in the Big 12 and only 4 road games. So you feel like that definitely favors them. Their issue is actually they play none of the worst teams in the Big 12. They don't get to play Arizona State, BYU, or Houston on their schedule, which that's tough. That means you're playing a lot of really good competition every single week. But again, 5 home games, that's a big advantage, even if you're missing the bottom half of the league.
Then there at 5.5, you've got Baylor, Cincinnati, and Colorado. Cincinnati, really tough year last year. Colorado, same. Baylor, same. So 3 teams who are all hoping to reverse their fortunes. And for Baylor right now, I think that's the perfect number. I don't know how you could really be too confident to go higher. I don't know how you could be so negative to go lower. And then again, yes, I can, because I can go read our boards right now, and I can see where somebody's making the case for why that's too high of a number, 5.5. I'm sure some post somewhere. But that's the sweet spot number. And then Colorado, I mean, same thing. These are all teams that expect to be bowl eligible after not being bowl eligible, but whether or not they will be is a major question, and so that's why this is the perfect number, I think, for Baylor. I mean, I would hope it's over, but I don't have very much confidence that I would go any higher than 6, so that is fine. Cincinnati, I assume lower, and then Colorado, I mean, that's a number that's perfect for them. They're at 5.5. Again, I'd have to look at their schedule some more and dig a little deeper, but that seems to be about right for those 3.
Yeah, I mean, I got Cincinnati under. I think Cincinnati deserves to be in the 4.5 group. I just don't have really faith in their coach at the moment. I just don't. I don't see it. I don't see much momentum in that program at this moment. So I would have them going under. Baylor and Colorado feel kind of like wild cards this year, to be honest with you. I think it could go, a bunch of different directions. What if Colorado gets really hot, starts scoring a lot of points, and somehow finds themselves at 8 wins? Would I be completely stunned by that? Not really. I wouldn't be that shocked if Baylor plays better defense and has an offense that's moving the ball more. Could they luck into 8 wins? Sure, possible. Would I bet on that? Probably not, but I do think those two are big-time wild cards this upcoming season because the talent is there. You just got to wonder how big is the bounce back from, pretty bad 2023 seasons.
And then finally wrapping it up, again, these from FanDuel, 4.5 win mark. You've got Arizona State. You've got Kenny Dillingham there in year number 2, but just a lot of issues to sort through once he arrived with the administration and most of that behind them, but still just kind of dealing with the after effects and just trying to get this program on track. BYU, first year in the Big 12, was a nice start and then a very rocky finish. Kalani Sitake, big fan of his, but they really need to bounce back. Got Gary Bohannon now at quarterback there, so will be interesting to see him during the regular season against Baylor. And then Houston there with first-year head coach Willie Fritz, and a lot of changes taking place down there in H-Town. I'd say for Arizona State, again, I'd have to look at their schedule. Same with BYU, really. But Houston, I don't know. I'm tempted to go at least 5 wins for them. But, again, I'd have to look more detailed here. But I just feel like they've got some juice now, and they've got a really good head coach that's come in there, and it doesn't take long to flip things. Not saying they're going to compete for a Big 12 title, but can they win 5 games? I don't think that's crazy talk to think that you can win 5 games. So that among that lower rung, if I were to make a bet, I think that's the one I would make would be Houston going over because I just don't know well enough with Arizona State or BYU right now to feel as confident there. But, yeah, that's the bottom tier from these win totals for 2024.
Yeah, Houston's schedule is just brutal.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, I know it is.
That's why I keep saying on every one of these, I don't know their schedule, but
for
here you
sure,
go. Yeah.
For sure. It is just, I was looking at the other day because I felt the same way because I like Willie Fritz. I like what they could be building, but my goodness, I mean, they got to play at Oklahoma in the non-conference. They also have to play UNLV, who was pretty dang good last year, and Rice, who beat them last year. And then you look at their schedule, they got 5 road games in the Big 12 and 4 home games. But the worst part for me is their home games are not easy. They have Iowa State, Utah, Kansas State, and Baylor. Those are their 4 home games. So we're not even going to talk about the road games. They're probably going to go 2-2, maybe 1-3 during their home stretch in the Big 12. That just is not a recipe for success. I would take the under on them. Arizona State and BYU are probably going to struggle as well. Again, I'd put Cincinnati in this group at the 4.5 tier. I think those are the 4 clear worst teams in the Big 12 at this very moment. That's just kind of my take on it right now. But Houston's schedule was one that really stood out to me. I think it's the toughest schedule in the Big 12, very likely.
So there you go, a little off-season fun. That's something that we can revisit in the springtime once we get rolling and a little bit more information comes down as far as just getting to know these new teams and their new faces and their new coaches and all of that. But always fun to see the win totals and kind of get a gauge on where Vegas thinks the teams sit and those totals out for all of college football. But the Big 12, obviously a focus here. And so there's your first look, but going to be a very interesting race. And certainly some glaring omissions with no Oklahoma and Texas there, which is just going to take some getting used to, just simply because we've been talking about them for 20 years. So it's weird to not have them, but it's also kind of becoming normal. But right there in that exercise, that's where it's kind of fun, though, is it's just not the automatic, like, default Oklahoma, default Texas. Like, every year they're going to be listed at probably 9 or 10 wins, no matter what. Every year they're going to be listed like top 2 or 3 as far as the odds go, and just to simply not have them there. I know there's going to be other areas. I'm not delusional. Like, losing them is not going to make the Big 12 better. You're not going to win more titles with them not here. You're not going to recruit better. You're not going to make more money. Nothing's going to be better, really, except for just maybe the uncertainty of the league as far as the chase that you don't automatically just place one or two or both teams right at the very top every single year. And so that's going to be a lot of fun, I think.
It was free money for a while because you just took the over on Oklahoma and the under on Texas, basically, and you were making money every single year, basically. And now you don't get that. Now you're having to sit there and go, okay, do we really think that Utah's just going to, come into this league and they're just going to win 10 games and it's going to be, fine and dandy and easy? It just is really hard to pick overs right now in this league when you have a high win total because there's so much parity, or at least we expect there to be so much parity.
Yes, so there you go. There's the football win totals from FanDuel for 2024, and that will put a bow on football talk for this episode. But National Signing Day is come and gone. Bears with a couple of big splashes. You have Gabe Hall headed to the NFL Combine, so good luck to him with the whole process. And there's some win totals as well. And spring football about a month away or so from getting started up. So that'll be a lot of fun once that comes down the pipeline as well.
Craig, do you want to hit on two quick notes, Gary Patterson and then Mac Rhodes? Do you want to just touch on those?
Yeah, I mean, the Gary Patterson thing, I didn't know if we were going to talk about that or not, but the reports out there from Colt Barber, our own Colt Barber last week, part of the benefits of being a Sikkim 365 member is getting in the conversations like that story right there. But the report being that he is joining Baylor football staff as an analyst, a senior analyst type of role, something that I guess he helped out a few teams last year, and then the year prior obviously was at Texas and had some success with them and helping out with their defense. And then last year, I guess he was just kind of a for-hire type of a guy, I guess. If you needed some breakdowns, then I guess you gave him a call and he could help you out there. But for the most part, was kind of out of the limelight a year ago. And then here comes this report that he is going to be joining the Baylor staff, and certainly feels like hell freezing over. I know there's nothing official from the school, so it's been kind of quiet since that report was released. But, yeah, I mean, if that comes to fruition, which I'm not doubting, but it's just that, you wait for official word, and I don't know if they'll even release official word on something like that. But it is obviously incredibly interesting news, and I think if I can just get past my own personal biases, that it's a very good move football-wise. I don't know how it's a bad move in any way, shape, or form other than just you want Gary Patterson to be a part of the Baylor program in any way. You shudder at the thought of him wearing a green and gold polo because it's just like, again, hell freezing over. But from a football perspective, which is really all that Dave Aranda needs to be worrying about at the moment is winning football games, this could and should help you win football games. So I think it's a great move from that standpoint.
I agree. Just football-wise, it makes total sense. Gary Patterson has a wealth of knowledge. We all know this. Whether we like him or not, it is a totally separate issue just because, I had to watch him a lot and cheer against him basically every game that he ever coached, at least while I was at Baylor. And so that's kind of the hard part, right? But I think from a football standpoint, it absolutely makes sense. He has a close relationship with Dave Aranda. It seems like someone Dave Aranda really looked up to in the coaching industry. And so, yeah, I mean, if he's going to come in and help scout teams as they come up to face Baylor, I think that's a great advantage on the staff. And, I've seen various people talk about, maybe he could be the guy if something happens with Dave Aranda. And I'm like, come on, y'all. That is not happening at all. That is not what's at play here. This is just getting a very smart coach on the roster to help, or on the coaching staff to allow them to just get better and be more prepared each week.
Yeah, I can see why some would make that jump, but I also am nowhere near ready to make that jump and assume that. I think it's to do what he's been doing the last couple of years, which is to make probably pretty good coin and have a pretty good schedule and to be able to do the fun things that he enjoys about football without all of the stuff that a lot of coaches don't enjoy as much, whether it be hitting the road recruiting or whatever else you want to throw into that mix. But, yeah, I mean, from an analyst standpoint and I guess close confidant to the head coach, I mean, we know that Aranda's balancing all of these various things, and now this year on his plate is having to take on more of a role with the defense because of the way things worked out last year. So, I mean, who better to come in and help plug some of those holes and do some of the things that maybe you just don't simply have time to do or the want to do. And Gary Patterson, they don't get much better as far as football minds go, so I can see where that makes a lot of sense. So that's very interesting, obviously, but we'll get more details and then at some point get to ask Aranda about that and then follow up and talk about it some more. But, yeah, super interesting report from our own Colt Barber last week, and I know a lot of people just not sure exactly how to feel about this, but, man, it's a business where you don't burn bridges because eventually you stick around long enough, you're going to end up on a staff with somebody that you never thought possible in some cases, and certainly nobody ever thought they'd see Gary Patterson in green and gold, but it looks like that's what we could be in store for. Meanwhile, Mack Rhodes, I assume, are you talking about the playoff committee? Is that okay? Yeah, he was named to the College Football Playoff Committee last week and will be one of the members to help select the teams for the expanded playoff beginning next year. One of the newest invites to be a part of that whole process. It's a 3-year term. And so year number 1 will be this 12-team playoff. First time ever. Jim Grobe, former Baylor interim head football coach, is on that committee as well and has been, I think, for the last couple of years. So this will be his last year, I believe. I know he was on there last year, but I think it's his 3rd year. So that'll be his last go, but he'll get a little brief reunion with Mack Rhodes there. So just shout out to old Groby. But, yeah, for Mack, I think it's a cool opportunity, and it's more food on your plate to digest on a plate that's pretty full right now for athletic directors. But this is one of those that you're willingly wanting to take on more work because it's a cool opportunity to be a part of the selection committee. And so, yeah, I think that's great for Mack and also great for Baylor to have somebody that'll be in the room and the Big 12 to have somebody representing them that has their best interest in mind. So cool honor for him.
Yeah, and I mean, it's going to be an exciting time with this new 12-team playoff. Hopefully there won't be as many, conversations and arguments about the last team since it's 12. We know there will be, but hopefully it gets a little bit better, and at least more teams are going to have a shot at winning a championship. So I'm excited. It should be fun to see, kind of how Mack handles that process, and also kind of, I'm sure he might be able to give some insight into the process as well, which is something that we'll actually get to hear more about. I think that's really cool. Have a little more inside news on that process.
Yeah, for sure. Whenever he joins us, I think he's actually going to join us this week, but it's going to not be every week. But, yeah, when he does join us, we'll be able to kind of pick his brain on just how all of that works, and that should be interesting stuff to talk about. But meanwhile, you've got Ross Dellinger with a mega article today on – they're talking about expanding the basketball tournament, which is nothing new, but already talking about – I mean, that seems like it's a done deal almost already is that. But also – diving into just kind of the politics going on behind the scenes and Brett Yormark and the Big 12 and the ACC stuff and just never-ending behind-the-scenes talk but about the future of college football. But an expanded basketball tournament looks like it could be on the way. And also, this little 12-team playoff is only set for a couple of years, guys. I don't know if you realize that, but it's only a 2-year deal. And so there's already the talk about 16, which – that starts to get to the point where I start to go, all right, now you're losing me because now it is getting watered down. But I know some people already feel that way about 12. I totally disagree. I just think it needs to be more than 4. I think 4 is just too little. It's just not enough to, especially if you've got some conferences that every year you can argue they have the 2 best, like the SEC. Then how do we only have 4 teams? Right. It just doesn't make any sense. It was never a good number. And that needs to change. But then you start to get to 16, and now I'm just like, okay, I don't know if I love that anymore. I think 12 will be fun. I'm going to enjoy that while we have it. But, Mack Rhodes a part of a lot of different conversations going on, and the Big 12 as well. And, that expanded tournament is a possibility in both football and basketball. It seems almost inevitable.
Yeah, I don't see the need for that in the NCAA tournament for basketball. I mean, it's already –
money.
I know, but it's already the greatest sporting event to me. Just so much fun to watch. Why do you need to make it so much bigger? 128 teams. Like, you're going to have teams that are terrible in that tournament. That doesn't make any sense. And I like the way it's set up now because it's literally just you're either a conference champion or you've done enough during the regular season to get in. You move it to 128 or whatever. You're taking teams that finished 6 and 12 in the Big 12.
Yeah, I haven't been able to peruse through the entire thing, I don't think it'd be doubling the field. I think if anything, you'd probably have like more of the play-in type of games or something along those lines. But again, I haven't read all the details, and it's not like it's happening now. It's just that's been conversation for a few years now, is expanding the basketball tournaments. That's nothing new, really. It just seems like with all of the changes going on, things like that could happen quicker than just speculation. And same thing for the football playoff, because again, they're only set up for the next 2 years, and you can add 4 more teams and make it 16. And then I will say the one thing about that, and we need to move on, is I don't know that I love the first-round buys the more that I've thought about it. Give them a home game, sure, but having a less game when you're already Georgia or Alabama or these teams, I think that's like a double advantage that you're also playing one less game. I don't know. I think that everybody should probably play a first-round game, but I get how it works in other formats, so we'll see. There's a lot to work out there, but let's move on. We'll have plenty of time to talk about the playoff and all that stuff throughout the offseason. Basketball, Baylor men back in the win column a couple weeks ago. Last time I was with you guys, they were in a little bit of trouble. They were sliding a bit and have been able to win 3 out of their last 4, but dropped a heartbreaker in Lawrence, Kansas on Saturday, a very winnable game, and could not finish at the end, 64-61, the number 4 Jayhawks, who turn around and get absolutely decimated by Texas Tech last night. I mean, blown out of the gym in Lubbock by, what was the final, like 20-something points?
They lost by 20.
Yeah, I mean, got destroyed. But they beat Baylor on Saturday, 64-61. And so the men, after 3 straight wins in Big 12 play, including beating Tech right before they played Kansas State, beating Iowa State, they are now 17-6 after the loss to Kansas, and 6-4 in Big 12 play now, and that puts them right there in the 4th spot. You've got Houston at 8-3 right now, Iowa State at 7-3. Texas Tech at 7-4, and then you've got Baylor now at 6-4, right there in that 4th spot, as I mentioned. So 17-6, the loss to KU. How you feeling about where they sit right now?
Yeah, I mean, they did what they needed to do during that 4-game stretch. They lost that game to TCU, but winning the 3 in a row after that gave you that 3-1 kind of stretch that I believe they needed going into that Kansas game, because I expected them to lose that Kansas game. I mean, it's really hard to win in Allen Fieldhouse. I understand all that. The bummer of this is they did not get blown out. They did not get, just an epic Kansas performance after a Kansas loss to Kansas State. They didn't get a Kansas team that was out there just, playing their best game. Instead, it was just Baylor playing terrible is the reason they lost this game by 3 points. They had 21 turnovers, I think. I mean, just a really tough performance when you go back and watch and you go, man, this was a complete blown opportunity. I mean, that's all it was. A chance to really put yourself in the conversation for winning the Big 12. You still have a home game against Houston on the schedule, and you don't have to go to Houston. You also don't have to go to Iowa State either, and you have that kind of just opportunity to be in a position where you're in second place going into this second half of the Big 12 slate, and they just couldn't get it done. It was a big bummer. They wasted an epic performance by Yves Missi, who was just terrific and has been terrific. He's unquestionably their best player right now, and he played awesome against Kansas in this one, but ultimately the more composed team won that game. I mean, that's just what it is. Baylor was doing a lot of dribbling one-on-one, dribbling it off your foot, making terrible passes, and again, just turning it over too much. When Jacoby Walter and Ray J. Dennis combined for 11 turnovers, that's a huge problem. And then when you have Josh O coming off the bench and only playing 8 minutes and piling up this stat line, 0 points, 0 rebounds, 0 blocks, 4 turnovers in 8 minutes, that's just not getting it done.
So is that a Josh O or Josh Zero?
Josh, yeah, I know. Yeah.
Sorry, I just can't let that sit there and hang like that. Hope he doesn't listen.
Awful. Yeah.
But I can't let that one just sit there like that. I gotta swing. But yeah, that was tough, and man, really let one get away from you. That would have been, what a win that would have been for you. So instead, the 3-game win streak gets snapped, and now tonight on a Tuesday, it is number 25 Oklahoma. And it will be a home game for Scott Drew and the Bears. They've got 8 games left in the regular season. 8 games left, 4 at home, 4 on the road. and it will be a home and away every single week. But this week starts off with the home game in Oklahoma, and then Saturday they will head to West Virginia. Counting tonight, 3 of the 8 games against ranked teams. So you've got Oklahoma who's sitting there just right there at the end line at 25. Then number 19 BYU. Did I say 3 or 4? It's 4 ranked teams remaining in their last 8 games. You got 25 Oklahoma, 19 BYU, number 3 Houston, and then number 6 Kansas. The second go around with them. And the Houston and Kansas games, those top 5-ish types of matchups will both be at the new venue here in Waco as the Foster Pavilion keeps on rolling along. So those ought to be raucous environments for that. But hopefully one tonight for Oklahoma, because this would be a game that you definitely want to win, need to win, and expect to win. So we'll see how they do against the Sooners and then the Mountaineers on Saturday.
Yeah, and I made a statement last week that I felt like 12-6 would win you a share of the Big 12 championship. And the more that I look at this, the more that things have progressed, I just have this feeling that Houston's probably going to get to 13-5, which means Baylor can only lose one more game to get a share of the Big 12. We'll see. I don't think that's realistic. I do think it's possible that they go 12-6, but they're going to have to play great basketball down the stretch and take care of business at home and against teams that they're better than. So winning tonight against Oklahoma, bouncing right back, beating West Virginia are 2, those are very much needed if they want any shot at winning the Big 12 championship. They also do get to play Houston in Waco, so you get an opportunity to make up a game there. But still, they're trailing that top team right now and have a ways to go to get back in that race.
Meanwhile, for the women, it's been topsy-turvy. It's been up and down, up and down, up and down for the last couple of weeks here as their win-loss pattern continued on last week. After having beat Houston on Sunday, they turned around last week and get beat up by BYU in Provo. So started off the week with a loss last Wednesday and then turned right around and beat West Virginia, a top 25 win, number 22 Mountaineers. Take them down 65-58 behind a nice performance from Dariana Littlepage Bugs. And so win-loss has kind of been the status quo for about a month now. And that has them sitting at 18-5 and 5th right now in the Big 12 Conference. Looking at the standings, you got Oklahoma at 11-1. Having a really nice year. They won 8 games in a row. Kansas State, who was at one point leading the conference, now a game behind at 10-2. Texas and West Virginia are both 9-3. And then you have Iowa State and Baylor at 7-5 apiece. So right there in the still the upper half, but really closer to the middle than anything else. Now at 7-5. Certainly it would be almost impossible to win the Big 12 at this point because you're asking for multiple teams to have to crater and lose multiple games, and you basically have to win out for all intents and purposes. So we know that's not going to be how it works out, but it's just been kind of up, down, up, down, up, down. Don't know which version you're going to get or how they're going to play, and certainly that was a disappointing loss to BYU, but to turn around and bounce back nicely against the Mountaineers. So here they sit, and we'll see how they close it out. But coming up, it'll be number 23 Oklahoma on Wednesday on the road, and then Texas Tech at home on Sunday for Nikki Collin and company.
Yeah, and Oklahoma's currently 11-1 in the Big 12, so that's going to be a huge test for Baylor. And honestly, I mean, it's pretty simple for Baylor right now. When they don't rebound, they lose basically every single time that happens. I mean, BYU is 4-8 in the Big 12 and 14-11 on the season, and they out-rebounded Baylor by, I think it was 14 rebounds. They just destroyed them on the glass, and this is a problem for Baylor. I mean, losing to teams that are, 500 or worse, I mean, that does not bode well when you get to the NCAA tournament. And say Baylor's a 5 seed and they're playing a 12 seed, and that team can rebound. I don't know that I'd be picking them to even get past the first round. It's just been so up and down with them, and you just never know what to expect. And it's crazy because then they show up and beat a 20-3 West Virginia team, and you start feeling good again, and then they just go out and lose to an Oklahoma State or lose to a BYU. It just has been a very weird season for them. Now, I realize they can beat almost any team in the country if they have a great night, but then on the flip side, they can lose to almost anybody. It's been a really weird year.
Yes, it has. So we'll see how this week plays out for both squads, but definitely an interesting stretch run coming down here. The last 8 games of conference play for both, and starting to approach the month of March. So money time coming up here, and we'll see what goes on this week with a pair of games for each of the Hoops teams. So that'll about do it as far as news goes. You ready to get in the mailbag here?
Let's do it.
Let's go ahead and start off with Scotty B, the Baylor King. Has the world frozen over? I mean, Gary Patterson at Baylor, while a few former Baylor staff members now at TCU at the same time. Also, Gary Patterson now follows me on Twitter and even direct messaged me asking what's up. So, wow, okay. I said, doing good and spending time with family and welcome to Baylor. He said, thanks and looking forward to helping wherever Aranda needs me. So, wow, that's very interesting stuff there, Scotty B. I can't say the same. Last I looked, I was still blocked, and it's been a decade. So
I'm blocked as well.
Yeah, well, I found a way to block him back about 6 years ago. So it's been mutual for quite a while now. I don't know if it actually works on his end. Obviously, I can't ask him, but it appears that I blocked him back. Mm-hmm. And that's, like I said, literally longer than 6 years ago, actually, that I would have done that because he blocked me like a decade ago during the height of all of that back and forth with he and Baylor and just the heat of that rivalry. So, congrats, Scotty B, on the interaction. But your thoughts on Gary Patterson, anything else to add from a little while ago?
I mean, it's a weird world we live in, right, where Gary Patterson's at Baylor, you got Kaz at TCU, you got Bryles at TCU. I mean, it is very all topsy-turvy, so it is a weird situation, and definitely weird for me who, when I went to school, it was, Art Bryles versus Gary Patterson during those years. So it is very weird, I got to say. And I think Baylor Twitter reacted the same way I would have, and just like anyone else would have who followed that really closely.
Doc Crow, well, I haven't been DMing Patterson, but I was wondering just how much impact you guys see these off-field hires making, and which, other than the towel girl, do you have to hire a towel girl now? I don't know how all that works. I don't think so because he's not like in head coach game mode like he was back in the day. But other than the towel girl, who do you think will end up being most valuable to the team moving forward? And I know they also announced some other staff hires earlier this week, and I just don't typically get all the way down to the nuts and bolts like that because that stuff changes over every year so often. But they did announce some new staff hires, some filling out of some positions. But who of the changes that you've seen this offseason so far do you think is the most valuable or will be?
Well, I think that the one that we're going to see, I think the most, notable production, like actually have substance next to their name, is going to be Mark Scott, who's coming in to coach special teams for Baylor after doing that for Houston during 2020 through 2023. So I think he's going to be the one that you're probably going to notice the most just because he's going to have he's going to be basically handling a position. And so it's going to be very important that he gets that group all together from punting to kicking to return game. I think we'd all like to see improvement there. And so we'll see if he's able to do that. So he'd be the one that I would kind of point to.
And I don't know if I was even asking about the new 6 added to the staff, but just in general, I think he was asking. I'd say Jake Spavital would be the guy that you look at. I think that's kind of what was being asked there, as opposed to the 6 peripheral guys.
Well, because he said off field, so I felt
okay. Well, yeah, off field like your offensive coordinator.
Okay. Well,
either way, you answered it one part, but I'm saying from the other perspective, I'd say Jake Spavital is the guy who is going to be the most valuable to the team moving forward because he's going to be the one that really dictates, I think, a lot of their success or lack thereof. I mean, depending on what this offense does, even if the defense is great, you got to be able to score points, man. And it's been a little bit of a struggle now for a couple of years, or about a year and a half. You go back to 2 seasons ago, midway point, and it's been all downhill basically since then for about a season and a half. But yeah, on the 6 additions that were put out there a couple of days ago, 4 quality control coaches and a pair of GAs. You mentioned, Mark Scott? Is that who you mentioned as far as taking on the special teams duties? I could see where that's going to be very important for sure. So thank you for that part of it, Doc. Follow up, what players this season do you see as being in a prove-it mode where they need to show something or possibly start looking elsewhere?
I mean, yeah, you would think that guys who are older, really, it's time to either show something or it's probably not going to work out. When you look at guys like Ryan Lingyel, I mean, he's a redshirt junior now, so he's probably got to make that situation work. Tyrone Brown, a linebacker, he's not playing over some of the younger guys, so he probably needs to show something. I think Jordan Jenkins, is he ever going to get on the field, or is he just passed up by all these younger guys who are now on the roster? Cameron Bonner, is he going to get a role? Javon Gibson, is that going to happen now that they're playing more wide receivers? I think those are the guys to really look at. I think you could move down to the sophomore level and look at guys, maybe it's about time we need to see more from them, or at least see them get on the field. As far as if you're looking at, a Kyan Roberts-Day, it might be time for him. Can he get on the field? Armani Winfield, is he consistently going to have a role on this team now?
Well, those guys you mentioned, especially those last two, it's been a couple years. So, yeah, it's about time to put up or shut up as far as the amount of time we spent talking about some of those guys. And I don't mean this, disrespectfully or anything, but, we spent a lot of time talking about how big of a deal Armani Winfield was and how big of a deal Kyan Roberts-Day was. And I'm not trying to single them out. There's others that you mentioned there. But, yeah, it's kind of at this point of all right, come on now. Especially when you desperately need help at wide receiver. Well, dude, it's year 3 in the program, so yeah, let's go. If it's not going to be year 3, that you can't really afford to wait, especially when you're sitting here talking about how they didn't get receivers in this class and they need receivers. Well, they got receivers; they're on the roster. They just need them to step up and make impacts more so than they have at this point. And then Kyan Roberts-Day, it's been a matter of finding the right spot for him. Is he finally in the right spot? Can he use all that size and athleticism that was so attractive? And we could go on up and down the roster, but those two jump out because they were so heavily talked about.
Yeah, they were, and at positions where they do need more guys to step up, right? Maybe not start, but they need more guys to step up and provide depth, especially on the defensive line. That's an area they really need Kyan Roberts-Day to make that leap. They need Jackie Marshall to be healthy because, in fairness, we've seen flashes from Jackie, but now he's going to have to prove it again, right? He was thought to be potentially, the best defense lineman for Baylor last year. He gets hurt. Is he going to get back to where he was? We'll see. I think that is a question as well. So there's a lot of guys that are in prove-it mode. You could look at the secondary like a Reggie Bush II. Is it his time to finally get on the field and provide a spark? Maybe he moves to safety. That could be intriguing. A lot to look at, I think, for that group. But I think the junior group and the redshirt junior group is the group that you really, you need to see something, or else it's you're expecting the very last year for things to just work out all of a sudden. I just don't know if that's really feasible.
Yep, so there's a few options for you, and appreciate it, Doc, for the questions. Overrated says, outside of Baylor, which football programs in the new look Big 12 have had the best and worst offseason to this point? I'd say Arizona's had a pretty topsy-turvy offseason. Losing your head coach and then losing and the guy who made you interesting again for the first time in a while, and then losing a bunch of the players. You had your star quarterback and your star wide receiver elect to return, so we'll see how that works. But that one definitely takes them down a peg just on the eye test alone, losing Jed Fish and then some of the players that he took with him to Washington. And then beyond that, I feel like, I don't know, that one just jumps out as being the obvious choice for the worst offseason. I don't know if it's actually the worst, but that one's been, as of late, the one that hasn't been the most fun for Arizona fans for certain.
Yeah, they've had the worst, I would say as well, just because, you lose a coach that was providing so much momentum for your program. It felt like Arizona was going to go into the Big 12 ready to rock and roll. And 8.5 wins is your, win total, your first year in the Big 12. That's a very high number. And it felt realistic if Jed Fish was there. It felt like he was going to come in and make them a top 4 team in the Big 12 immediately. But losing him, I do think, takes some of the shine off of that. And I do think it hurts the roster. And I do think there's, like you mentioned and like I mentioned, I look at the 8.5 number and I'm like, I'm not taking the over on that. I'm taking the under on that because I do think their offseason was brought down a little bit. Now, as far as best offseason, I do think that Utah getting Cam Rising back was huge for them. I think in general, it just adds stability at that position for that program, and a program that comes in with very high expectations, and for good reason, because they probably have one of, if not the best quarterback in the Big 12 coming back, which is huge.
Yeah, I'd say also good offseason. Houston hiring Willie Fritz, I think, is massive. I don't think everybody understands, or maybe they do, how just disliked Dana Holgorsen was by the end there in Houston. And so just had a very contentious feeling surrounding the entire program of like, is he going to be here? Does he want to be here? Do we want him here? He's annoying. Now we're not winning. I mean, it's just there was a lot of, I think, bad taste in the mouths of Houston fans just towards the end with Holgorsen and vice versa to some extent. And so now you've got a guy in Willie Fritz who's clearly happy to be back in Texas and clearly energized and has had a great run at Tulane and now is in the Big 12 and has, Fertitta backing him and the state of Texas to recruit and all of those things. So I feel like Willie Fritz is going to inject a lot of good mojo for Houston. So that'd be a team that jumps out as having a good offseason so far. And then everybody else, without thinking about it too much longer, I think has had just, what you'd expect, like your typical, like we feel like we're getting better through recruiting and coaching hires and everything looks good. Nobody that just jumps out as like extreme one way or the other, but Houston definitely sticks out as an extreme swing to the good side of things, and Arizona a swing to the not necessarily bad, but just very uncertain compared to how they were going to roll in otherwise.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point about Holgorsen not being very well liked and that being a problem for Houston. I actually think the same about Cincinnati, which is why I'm so low on them. That fan base does not like Scott Satterfield at all, and I get the reasons for that. And so that's why I would also say they probably fit in that bad offseason category because the mojo is just, it's not there. The vibes are not there.
Yep, so appreciate the question, and we'll talk more Big 12 as a whole just as we move along here. So if you have questions in that regard, feel free to pass those along. But going to be a very interesting conference to break down and to figure out. Barely knows, is there a place to find Baylor men's basketball player efficiency ratings? And if so, what is the rating of each team member? I don't know of a place without a subscription required.
I got one.
Okay, go for it then.
Yeah, I got one, but I'm going to do, I think it's more evidence if we just do conference play. In my eyes, instead of the full season, I think it tells more of the story of where we're at currently. So quickly, here we go. Yves Misi, who I said is the best player on this Baylor team right now. He's got a 26.6 player efficiency rating right now. By far the most on this team, because then you get down to Jalen Bridges, 19.2, Langston Love, 19.1, Ray J. Dennis, 17.0, Jacoby Walter, 16.9, Jaden Nunn, 14.1, Caleb Lohner, 14.1, Josh O, 13.9, Miro Little, 1.4, and Everyday John, negative 23.9. Yeah, not a great number there. Obviously, he's only played, in fairness, he's played 12 minutes. So just to weed that out. But it's very clear who the best player on this team is currently playing the best in conference play. And then the guys who are struggling, I think it's important to mention that Jacoby Walter at 16.9 in conference play. He was at 19.6 for the season. So that tells you how much better he was in non-conference than he has been in conference play.
So there you go. Hopefully that answers your question. Barely knows. Appreciate the mailbag participation. Billy21, Welch had a thumbs up. We'll get back to his question there. Bearcats to 6-2 the rest of the way for men's basketball, win the league, which would mean that 6-2 would put them at 12-6 overall. And right now you got Houston at 8-3. Iowa State 7-3, Tech 7-4, Baylor 6-4. So would that be able to put them over the top there?
So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. I thought 12-6 would get you a share, but as I look more at Houston's schedule, I don't see them losing 3 more times. I mean, you tell me if I'm wrong. Texas, Iowa State, at Baylor, Cincinnati, at Oklahoma, at UCF, Kansas. Do you see 2 or 3 losses?
I mean, maybe a couple, but it's really stretching it, yeah.
Right, to get to 3, and that 3 would get them to 12-6. I think they're going to finish 13-5, so I think Baylor's probably going to have to match that. If I had to guess, now, is it impossible? No. Maybe Houston just stumbles on the road a couple times. Very possible. But as I look more and more at it, I think that Houston getting that win over Cincinnati narrowly this past week probably solidified them getting to 13-5.
Yeah, I could see them. Man, they'd have to drop games at home, which is just what you're not going to really bank too much on. I don't worry about them going like to Oklahoma or to UCF, really. I mean, Baylor on the road, you could see being a loss. Kansas at home at the very end of the year. Yeah, sure, you could see that being a loss, but that's still only 2 games.
And that's a revenge game because Kansas beat them bad.
Yeah, and that's still only 2, so where's another one coming from? And so, yeah, I don't know. I don't see that either. As a strong possibility in the cards. So, 6-2 rest of the way, win the league. It'd be close, but probably not. But hey, go do it, and let's see what happens and see how close they can get. Appreciate the question. Bearcats and Billy21 will close us out here. What is happening in the weight room? In the past, you have posted outstanding performers on at least a daily or weekly basis. The weight room is really meaning to the coaches and to the respective players themselves, but for us fans, it tells us somewhat of each player's progress and how each athlete is meshing into the Bear program. Any consistent updates are appreciated. Sick'em Bears, 365ers, always the best you can be. Always be the best you can be. So, Billy, appreciate the question or comment there, and the weight room, kind of what's going on there. I mean, they put out. I mean, I've never followed it and reported on it closely because I'm not there in the weight room, nor are any of us. But the strength and conditioning staff has a Twitter page that they update pretty regularly. And I don't know, ever since Elon took over, there's stuff that I just don't see anymore. And I'll see it, and I'm like, I follow this account. How do I never see anything from this account? And that's one of them. And you'd think that with all my Baylor back and forth, that'd be like front thing, like here's your recommended, here's that. I have to go search for that account for some weird reason. So sometimes I miss them posting, but they do post pretty regularly. Last I looked, and that's a way to get a little bit of insight. But anything else you'd like to add on the weight room outside of that? Because that's where the top performers can be easily seen, is that Baylor Strength and Conditioning account.
Right. That's the best place to follow. I mean, if you want some quick notes that I've had, I mean, guys like Trevin Maye, Kyan Roberts-Day, Jackie Marshall, Jordan Neighbors, Dom Richardson. I mean, really, a lot of the top guys have been on the list multiple times. Like the guys that you would expect have been on it quite a bit. Those are some of the names that have really stuck out to me. I think Alvin Ebasele has been on it a couple times as well. But yeah, I think in general, that's kind of where things are at. I know you want to say that it tells a huge story. I don't necessarily think it tells a massive story unless you're on the list a ton. So like a Jackie Marshall, for instance, has been on it numerous times. That's a great sign for, hey, he must be healthy. Hey, he's getting back to full strength. That's great news because he's expected to be really good next year. And then you look at a guy like Jordan Neighbors who moves back to wide receiver this year, and there's been high expectations for him ever since he entered the program. Now he gets a new offense and gets an opportunity to show what he can do, and we get the kind of sure thing that he is moving back to wide receiver. So I think that's great as well, and that's kind of telling. But outside of that, I think it's somewhat telling, but I don't think it tells a full picture of kind of what's going on.
So there you go. Hopefully that helps out, and you can follow that account and get your dose of almost daily, I guess, updates or at least weekly updates as far as the off-season workouts go. And that'll about wrap us up here with the mailbag. Thanks to everybody for putting their questions in there and being a part of the show today. Grayson, anything before we head on out the door?
No, nothing really. Just be sure to check out the premium side of things. We're into a little bit of a dead period, but of course for basketball, 2025 recruiting, other sports, tennis just got a big win over number 5 USC this week. Be sure to check out Sick'em 365 premium side. We got all kinds of insight and information on there.
Yes, so it's slowing down a little bit because of the wrapping up of the signing day class, but spring football also right down the pipeline. That'll be here before you know it, and a lot of hoops going on right now with both the men's and women's teams right in the thick of things for the tournament and the Big 12 race. A little bit more, but very much in the upper half and not the dragging the bottom. So we'll see how strong each team can close and how interesting they can make it and where they can find themselves seated in the conference tournaments, but still a few weeks to play out there, although we are getting down to the final month of the regular season. So things are heating up for sure. Appreciate everybody again that chimed into the mailbag, and just those of you who have watched us live. Tuesdays at 11:15 on the Baylor Athletics on Sick'em 365 YouTube page. If you haven't already, please hit that thumbs up button and that subscribe button. We would certainly appreciate that. And that'll do it for us this week. Thanks to Garrett Ross behind the scenes and to Grayson Grundhoefer. And I'm Craig Smoak. Appreciate your time, and we will talk to you next week. This has been the Bearcast on SicEm365.com.